Alrighty, hello everyone folks, and good morning. Welcome to another edition of Know Your Unit. Today we're talking about the Fusillier, or Fusillier, or whatever you prefer to call them, depending on your level of French. So this is kind of universally regarded as the okayest unit in the game. Essentially a range type of unit that's kind of okay in most situations. Just kind of generally handy to have around. Not quite as specialized as the archer, but still having some of the kind of cool overall features of something like the beast tamer there. So let's go ahead and get into it here. All right. So first and foremost, gear access-wise, they're fairly similar, fairly simple. They've got some access to a good amount of daggers, namely all of them, and they have access to many ranged weapons, including. Wait, what am I doing here? Sorry, including all of the fusils, as well as some crossbows, namely all of the crossbows. I don't know why I keep saying some when I mean all. They start off, technically speaking, supposedly using crossbows, and then they're supposed to move over to guns, though realistically, there are no level caps this time around, so you can use them whichever way you prefer. Now, realistically speaking, most of the time, this mostly is just going to consist of just kind of keep them over there using their guns and such, but you know, there are some interesting potential ideas that can come out of let's say applying both crossbow and gun finishers. Like with guns, you have access to your light and wind finishers, as well as your own personal finisher, and on top of that, with crossbows, you have access to fire as well as some other debuffs if you'd prefer. There's some tricky stuff to do there. Personally, I like running pistol and knife here on Deneb here, since, you know, she basically can be a caster with a gun. It's just kind of a fun thing, but in general, their guns are a bit of a kind of somewhat unique weapon. Their whole kind of shtick here is that they've got very high attack penetration score. However, just like other ranged weapons, they are more subject to armor, but due to this high score, they typically will do a bit better against most armor types. Against heavy armor, they can still potentially drop off like many other ranged types, but if you're using your Terenites, you're using breaches, anything along those lines, you should see some nice happy numbers popping out of these guys consistently. And additionally, despite technically being on the kind of more confusing end when it comes to something like their primary cursed weapon access thing over here, generally you'll still potentially have some useful stuff for this. Personally, my favorite niche build for the Fusillier is actually going to come from the set that she's running right here. So let's say, for example, you took a cursed weapon and you decided to turn a Dragoon into a cursed gun. This would essentially create a long-range, essentially high bonus weapon with an elemental bonus that also would have an anti-dragon bonus, which you could then combine in with their skills to potentially have a Dragon Slayer bullet that's able to fire through walls with extended range. So that kind of stuff is pretty darn fun. But yeah, let's go ahead and talk about their skills next. So like I mentioned earlier, access to dagger finishers, crossbow finishers, as well as fusil finishers. Most of the dagger and crossbow ones I feel folks are probably familiar with. The fusil finishers are a little different. So Mirage Strike is going to inflict stagger. That's not really anyone's first choice, neither is Misstep. However, Atonement is a really solid dark punish for fairly cheap. Generally speaking, dark punishes are usually in the 70 range. And then Scattershot is going to be a surprisingly high attack bonus double shot here. That's, well, essentially going to delete anything Earth-related. Now, while it is especially good against Earth, it is one of those finishers that, it, again, has unusually high kind of overall damage for a multi-hitter. So this tends to be a nice little long-range slap against most things. However, it's worth noting that when it comes to these finishers, these are usually the thing you're actually going to want to be attacking with. When it comes to their actual gun weapon, one of the weird limitations of it is the incredibly high recovery time. You may notice that, for example, to fire the long gun over here is 52 recovery time, whereas one of their finishers over here with Scattershot is 25. Essentially, their actual guns take an incredibly long time to fire, and this also comes with the other gimmick over here when it comes to something like Quick Draw, allowing them to fire on other ranged units, turning them potentially into an anti-ranged unit setup. And actually, this is especially useful if, for example, you're running a lot of very high damage but low everything else type of a setup here. So, for example, the snipe set is going to be really handy for them. They run their quick draw, they run their course correction, and Archer tries to shoot at them, and they essentially just go and fire around the wall to go knock them backwards. Now, it's worth noting, as far as all this stuff is concerned, that when it comes to their skills, Quick Draw is going to be very niche. But again, if you, for example, switch them out to an element that you see that there's a strong archer, that's going to go after them, you could potentially see some interesting returns. This is especially handy against something like the Heaven General that uses a longbow. Course correction on a dark element Fusillier, essentially running their sharpshoot. Course correction, as well as quick draw, could potentially allow for a unit that's kind of baiting the unit and also strong against them at the same time. Very niche setup, but potentially pretty darn fun. Their other skill here outside of their gun tricks, which I guess actually let's just go over the gun tricks real quick. So yeah, quick draw is just basically you fire first if you're shot upon by a ranged unit from any direction. And it'll follow the usual kind of setup here. So if you have course correction, it's usually just going to hit wherever, because guns have some of the longest range in the game. If you don't have course correction on, you may just kind of see this as a bit of a downside, because they'll just shoot directly in front of them. Can be a little bit of a problem. Sharpshoot is your guaranteed crit and hit, and additionally you've got course correction again that will allow you to ignore terrain. It should be noted that unlike the PSP version, this one actually does ignore everything this time. So as long as there isn't, as long as there's something that they want to hit, they're going to be able to hit it. PSP rolls were kind of weird because it basically would also hit props and the units in the way, which kind of defeated the purpose. But yeah. Aside from that, due to the fact that they have, for example, their earrings and stuff like that, you would potentially be able to make solid use of something like the lobber skill over there to do their usual grenade boosting thing. Unfortunately, unlike something like the Ranger or the Beast Tamer, they actually are going to be a bit worse when it comes to shot grenades, unless you're running a dagger. So like if you're running dagger skills or crossbow skills, fusil skills, I'm not actually sure that any of the fusils actually come with that extra 30 weapon skill. I don't have the full complement of them in this particular save file, but as far as I'm aware, there shouldn't be any weapons here that will give you that 30 boost. Again, as far as I'm aware, there's a pretty solid chance I might have missed it somewhere, but as far as I'm aware, you can't actually boost gun skill that high. So if you're, for example, going and doing the grenade boost with something like daggers or crossbows, it'll work as well as it usually does. So they can still make it work that way, but yeah, lobber plus shots is a really solid combination. Unlike Beast Tamers, though, they don't get access to the same gear. They don't get access to the same movement, and again, their particular weapon loadout isn't quite as conducive to it. Generally, if it's something you want, it's there. Just know that it's not necessarily going to be the best version of this. I mean, personally, I prefer to just use them for the whole course correction into Dragon Slayer thing with a Dragon Slayer set. But, that's entirely up to you. Whatever you're feeling that day, you just go ahead and do you. But yeah, Dragon Slayer set on these guys is especially handy because one of the interesting gimmicks with their weapons, as you may have already noticed, is that instead of just a elemental bonus, in many cases you can have a very, very high physical bonus that's applied to this stuff. So for example, these ones are not even ranked up at this point, and I believe they can cap out at 40. So instead of having an elemental bonus on their weapons, except for the cursed variant, they would be able to get it to, again, I believe it's like 40 for the actual damage bonus that they get off this once you have them maxed out. So that can be really significant. And again, it's neutral damage, so it's just going to be using whatever their personal element is, which can be potentially very handy. And yeah, really high attack bonuses on top of that. Generally, they're like a less min-maxable, but more, I guess, consistent version of archers to some degree. Again, they're strictly in that kind of, like, this is neat, but it's mostly just kind of in the okay pile type of situation. So, yeah, they're fun. Occasionally you can just insta-delete something at long range with them. For the most part, their weapons are still kind of a pain to get a hold of, but, it could be worse. And yeah, they can do the whole pistol and knife thing, or pistol and crossbow if you'd like to have some really weird loadouts, and that's kind of really about it as far as these guys go. So, let me know if you've come up with any interesting stuff as far as the Fusillier went. Again, fairly low movement on these guys. Their basic movement is only 3, so like snipes that would help them get up to be able to catch up to Beast Tamers to some degree, but like, they definitely... comparing 1-to-1 doesn't necessarily always make them look super favorable, but again, their role is primarily to hide in the outskirts and just kind of snipe stuff along as it comes there. So, let me know what you guys have come up with for these guys. Have yourselves a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.